JD Vance had just placed his order when the restaurant's manager strode over. The burly man, dressed in a spotless white shirt, stopped Vance in his tracks. "Excuse me, sir," the manager said, voice firm and uncompromising. "You must remove that hat or leave this establishment." Vance slowly set his fork down. He looked at the manager and asked, "Why?" The manager's lips pressed into a tight line. "We do not allow political provocations in our restaurant," he replied curtly. "Provocations?" Vance raised an eyebrow. "It's only a hat. It's a piece of fabric with a logo." At that moment, diners around them fell silent. Plates paused mid-air. Conversation stopped abruptly. Several patrons whipped out their phones and began recording. The manager's gaze did not waver. He repeated his order, his tone even sharper this time. "Remove the hat, or leave." Vance's eyes scanned the room. The silence was heavy with anticipation. He took a slow breath, then smiled. His smile was slight, almost amused. "I have seen this before," he said, his tone low and challenging. "But this time, things will be different." A waiter hurried by, glancing nervously between the two men. Vance continued, his voice steady. "I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm here to enjoy my meal. Yet I wonder, why does a hat become an issue? What message does this send?" The manager shifted his weight, his eyes narrowing. "This isn't about a message," he snapped. "It's about keeping our establishment free from political drama. We want our customers to enjoy their meals in peace." Vance leaned forward slightly. "So you believe removing a hat will silence opinions?" he asked. "That fabric is not a threat. It's an accessory." The manager's jaw tightened. "Rules are rules," he said. "You have to abide by them." A murmur ran through the room. One patron, seated near the entrance, said loudly, "Let him be," while another countered, "He's causing a scene." The tension was palpable. Vance's smile widened. "I didn't order a confrontation," he remarked. "I ordered a meal, and now I have a choice. Either comply with a rule that targets a simple hat, or stand by my principles." The manager stepped closer. "This is a private establishment," he insisted. "We set the rules." Vance straightened his posture. "Then why enforce a rule on a piece of clothing?" he challenged. "Isn't the purpose of a restaurant to serve food, not to enforce a political agenda?" The manager's eyes flickered with irritation. "I'm here to enforce our policy," he said flatly. "Remove the hat or leave." A tense silence followed. The room was filled with the low hum of uneasy whispers and the soft clicking of smartphone cameras recording every moment. Vance looked around, noting that many of the diners were watching intently. Some nodded in approval, others frowned disapprovingly. "Consider this," Vance said, his tone measured. "I understand you want to avoid controversy, but by targeting one symbol, you invite a larger debate. Today it's a hat. Tomorrow, what will it be?" The manager hesitated, his eyes darting to the recording phones. "This isn't about debate," he replied, his voice dropping. "It's about maintaining decorum." Vance shook his head slowly. "Decorum is not a state of silence," he countered. "It's a space where ideas can clash without fear. I'm not here to disrupt your decorum, but to stand by my right to express myself." The manager's face reddened. "I'm sorry, sir," he said through gritted teeth, "but I must ask you one more time. Remove the hat or leave." A diner from a nearby table, emboldened by the tension, called out, "Let him keep it. It's just a hat." The room stirred, divided by support and disapproval. Vance took a step back, then crossed his arms. "I won't remove my hat," he declared clearly. "I won't let a rule be used to silence me." The manager's eyes narrowed further. He reached for his notepad, as if preparing to write down a complaint. "Then I must ask you to leave immediately," he stated. Vance's smile was unwavering. "Leaving isn't an option," he said. "I came here to dine. If you want to make headlines, go ahead." At that, a tension-filled pause descended on the restaurant. Every eye was fixed on the unfolding standoff. The manager, realizing the gravity of the moment and the eyes of the patrons upon him, hesitated. A murmur of discontent rippled through the room, and the manager's hand trembled slightly over the notepad. "Sir," Vance said quietly but firmly, "I'm not asking for a debate on my hat. I'm simply stating that I choose to remain as I am." For a long second, nothing happened. Then the manager's expression hardened once again. "I'm sorry," he said, voice low but resolute, "but you must leave." His words cut through the silence like a knife. Vance looked directly at him. "If that's your final decision," he said, "I will not let this stand without consequence." The restaurant fell into an even deeper silence, as if everyone sensed that this was more than a simple disagreement. Vance's defiant tone and calm determination left no doubt. This was not a battle he intended to lose. With the tension mounting and all eyes on them, Vance's smile returned, cool and confident. He had seen similar confrontations before, but this time, he knew, everything would be different. By the time the manager retracted slightly, the standoff had become a defining moment. In the charged silence that followed, one thing was clear: the rules were about to be challenged, and the battle lines had been drawn. Vance did not rush to respond. He reached for a glass of water and picked it up slowly, his movements deliberate and calm. Taking a measured sip, he set the glass back down on the table, his eyes locked steadily on the manager. Every second stretched as the tension in the restaurant grew thicker, the air charged with unspoken challenges. "Let's do it," Vance said, his tone low and even. He maintained steady eye contact with the manager as he continued, "You will give me the official reason, and I will decide whether to file a lawsuit." His words carried a calm determination that hinted at consequences beyond the immediate dispute. The manager's face tightened instantly. His jaw clenched as he fought to control his rising irritation. "You cannot sue us, sir. This is a private establishment," he said sharply, his voice betraying a note of exasperation. The straightforward answer, however, did little to ease the charged atmosphere. Vance nodded slowly, absorbing the manager's response. He leaned back slightly, his gaze unwavering, and replied, "Aha." His tone carried a quiet irony. "Are you familiar with the Civil Rights Act?" he asked, the question hanging in the air like a loaded challenge. Almost immediately, a murmur spread among the diners. A few patrons began to clap, their hands coming together in a slow, deliberate rhythm that punctuated the charged silence. The manager's face turned a deeper shade of red, his cheeks flushing as he struggled to maintain his composure under the growing scrutiny of the room. "Is it really so important for you to keep that hat on your head?" the manager demanded, raising his voice slightly. His question was direct, leaving no room for evasive answers. It was a challenge not just to Vance's choice of headwear, but to his right to express himself. Vance's eyes narrowed as he rose from his seat, his movements measured and unhurried. He stepped forward, closing the distance between himself and the manager with deliberate purpose. "No," he declared, his voice firm and resolute. "It's not about the hat." He paused, surveying the room with a cool detachment as every patron watched the confrontation unfold. "It's important for me to keep your restaurant in the news." At that moment, the tension shifted palpably. The simple yet provocative statement rippled through the room. The diners, previously silent or murmuring quietly, now reacted with visible intensity. Chairs scraped the floor as people shifted in their seats, and voices began to rise in support and dissent alike. The manager, clearly rattled by the unexpected turn of events, took a hesitant step back. His eyes darted nervously toward the smartphones in the hands of several patrons, and he struggled to find his footing. Every word exchanged was measured against the weight of public scrutiny. The stakes were no longer confined to the restaurant's policies, but had spilled into a broader debate about rights and expression. Vance's stance was unwavering. His calm, deliberate pacing and precise language underscored his commitment to standing up for what he believed was right. He allowed his silence to speak as loudly as his words, letting the implications of his challenge settle over the room. It was a silent declaration that rules meant little when they suppressed individual expression. Throughout the exchange, the clapping grew louder, turning into a steady rhythm that resonated with approval from those who believed in standing up against arbitrary restrictions. The energy in the room shifted, the atmosphere now crackling with the promise of further conflict. Every eye was fixed on the pair, the air thick with anticipation of what might come next. As the manager struggled to reassert his authority, Vance's challenge had already begun to tip the balance. His measured challenge was not merely a personal defiance. It was a statement that rules enforced without accountability could backfire, drawing unwanted attention and igniting debate. His words cut through the tension like a knife, exposing the fragile underpinnings of the manager's position. With the diners watching intently and the weight of their expectation pressing down, Vance's final remark echoed in the charged silence. His declaration left no doubt about his intent. In that pivotal moment, the scales of power shifted, and the confrontation was no longer just about a hat. It had become a battleground for principles, for the right to be heard, and for the courage to challenge unjust norms. The room erupted into noise. Vance returned to the hall with a deliberate stride. The tension from the earlier confrontation still lingered in the air, but his expression remained calm and determined. Standing at the center of the room, he addressed the gathered crowd in a loud, clear voice. "Well, dear visitors," he announced, his tone measured and confident, "what do you think of the new policy?" A ripple of reactions spread immediately. A few people in the audience burst into laughter, their chuckles cutting through the charged atmosphere. The laughter was not mocking, but a release of the built-up tension, a spontaneous reaction to the absurdity of the situation. Yet, not everyone shared the amusement. A voice from the back of the room shouted, "This is absurd. People can wear whatever they want." The exclamation was met with a mix of nods and murmurs of agreement from some onlookers. Almost immediately, another voice erupted, this time filled with anger. "Kick him out. He's provoking everyone." The demand echoed around the hall, causing a brief moment of disarray as guests exchanged uncertain glances. Despite the discord, Vance remained unfazed. He stepped closer to the makeshift stage formed by the restaurant's seating area and pulled out his phone. Within moments, Vance had switched his focus to his Twitter live feed. The live broadcast screen became a portal for the unfolding drama. On the screen, a bold text message scrolled. "This restaurant refuses to serve people because of their political views. What do you say?" The impact of the message was immediate. The digital display connected the physical confrontation with the wider public debate, and the audience in the hall was now part of a larger conversation. The restaurant's guests, many of whom had been recording the earlier events on their phones, turned their attention to the live stream. Their eyes widened as they saw the message, a stark statement of defiance against what many saw as arbitrary discrimination. In the midst of this, the manager, who had been trying to maintain order and enforce the restaurant's strict rules, visibly paled. His face drained of color as he realized the gravity of the situation. The authority he once wielded seemed to crumble in front of the relentless glare of social media and the united public opinion gathering in the room. The manager tried to regain control of the situation. He stepped forward, his voice strained as he attempted to speak over the murmur of the crowd and the live broadcast. "Sir, you are disrupting our establishment," he declared, but his words fell flat against the surge of voices that were now taking over the room. Vance continued his broadcast without missing a beat, his eyes fixed on the camera. "Look around you," he said, his voice rising above the clamor. "Today, your silence has turned into a roar. This isn't just about a hat or a rule. This is about the right to express oneself without fear of censorship." His words were simple and direct, resonating with the underlying current of frustration among the audience. As the broadcast went live, the reaction was immediate. Some of the guests began clapping, their approval evident in the rhythmic sound of applause. Others recorded the video on their own devices, ensuring that every moment was captured and shared. The interplay of live action and real-time social media had turned a small conflict into a public spectacle, one that was now being witnessed by a far wider audience than just those present in the hall. Amid the rising cacophony of voices and the growing momentum of the live stream, the restaurant staff moved cautiously. Some tried to restore order, while others simply stood back, aware that any misstep could escalate the situation further. The air was thick with anticipation, every person in the hall waiting to see which way the scales would tip. Vance's challenge had struck a nerve. His measured tone and unyielding stance had transformed what began as a mundane policy dispute into a larger debate about rights and personal expression. The message on his Twitter live feed continued to circulate, sparking comments and retweets that only added to the mounting pressure on the manager and the establishment. The manager, now visibly shaken, attempted to address the situation once more. His voice wavered as he tried to insist on his authority. "Please, understand that these are our house rules," he stammered, his eyes darting nervously to the smartphones capturing every moment. The words rang hollow against the overwhelming sentiment of resistance that filled the room. Vance's eyes never left the camera. His message was clear. The rules that attempted to stifle individual expression would no longer go unchallenged. "This is not just a policy," he said firmly, "it's a challenge to the status quo." The words hung in the air, charged with defiance and promise. As the confrontation reached its peak, the energy in the room intensified. The live broadcast had turned the restaurant into an arena of public debate, with every spectator now an active participant in the unfolding drama. Just as the manager's words began to falter under the weight of public opinion, the tension reached a critical mass. But then, another unexpected figure intervened. A few minutes later, a sharply dressed man in an expensive suit entered the restaurant. He was the owner of the establishment. The moment he stepped inside, he was confronted by a scene he had not anticipated. Phones in hand, cameras recording, and a group of people engaged in a heated argument. His eyes quickly scanned the room, drifting over JD Vance, his unmistakable hat, and the restaurant manager, who still bore a stern expression. The owner paused at the threshold, clearly disturbed by the commotion. He walked purposefully toward the center of the room, where the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Every step was measured, his presence commanding immediate attention. When he reached the front, he halted and addressed the crowd, his voice firm yet calm. "What is going on here?" he demanded, his tone brooking no nonsense. The restaurant manager, caught off guard by the sudden arrival, stepped forward immediately. His posture stiffened as he tried to assert control over the situation. "This man refused to abide by our rules," he said, gesturing pointedly toward Vance and his hat, his voice trembling slightly with the pressure of the moment. The owner's expression shifted into one of mild amusement. He snorted dismissively at the manager's explanation. "And what rules?" he inquired sharply, clearly questioning the validity of the manager's claims. His eyes narrowed, scrutinizing the manager and Vance, as if searching for any sign of justification. Caught in the spotlight, the manager swallowed hard. He attempted to recover his composure and replied, "We do not want politics here." His voice trailed off, the words hanging awkwardly in the charged atmosphere. "Really?" the owner interjected, raising an eyebrow. His tone turned skeptical and challenging. "And nothing about the Black Lives Matter poster on our wall?" he asked. The question cut through the tension like a scalpel, highlighting an inconsistency in the restaurant's supposed policy. At these words, the manager's confidence visibly crumbled. He shrank back as if the owner's remark had struck a nerve, his face flushed with discomfort. "That's different," he muttered defensively, clearly unprepared to defend the selective enforcement of the rules. Before the manager could continue, JD Vance seized the moment with deliberate timing. Sensing that the conversation had reached a critical juncture, Vance stepped forward and interjected. His voice was steady, carrying the weight of the ongoing debate. "So, you choose certain political symbols and not others," he stated plainly, his words cutting through the murmur of the crowd. The question was posed like a challenge, demanding accountability from the management. The room fell into a deathly silence. Every patron present, who had been watching the exchange with bated breath, now fixated their gaze on the owner. The silence was profound, punctuated only by the occasional shuffle of feet or a whispered comment. The owner's eyes met those of the diners, who were now waiting for him to take a stand, to make a decision that could alter the course of the evening. In that moment, the owner sensed that the balance of power in the room had shifted dramatically. His initial amusement had faded, replaced by the weight of responsibility. The manager stood uncomfortably by, his earlier authority now in question. JD Vance, with his characteristic calm defiance, awaited the owner's next move, the tension in the room mounting by the second. Without a word, the owner's gaze swept over the assembled crowd and the conflicting figures before him. His silence was as powerful as any declaration. For a moment, the only sound was the collective, anxious breathing of the patrons. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation. Every person present understood that the decision made at that moment would resonate far beyond the walls of the restaurant. People stared at the owner, awaiting his decision. His poised silence promised that the ensuing verdict would ignite debate lasting well into the night. The tension in the restaurant had reached its peak. The owner, dressed in an expensive suit and exuding calm authority, turned sharply toward the manager. His face was stern, his eyes burning with disappointment and resolve. Without hesitation, the owner stepped forward and fixed his gaze on the manager. "You've just created hell for our restaurant," the owner declared, his voice low but firm. The words cut through the hushed room. The manager opened his mouth to speak, but his voice faltered. Before he could say anything, the owner reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. In a single swift motion, the owner began recording a live message. The phone's flash illuminated his face as he dictated a press statement. Press statement: "Our restaurant does not support any political bans. The manager, who acted on his own, is fired." The words appeared boldly on the screen for all to see. The announcement immediately spread through the restaurant as patrons exchanged shocked glances and whispered among themselves. The manager's face flushed deep red. His attempts to assert control had crumbled under the owner's decisive action. In that moment, his authority was completely stripped away, replaced by an overwhelming sense of defeat. The owner's decision was final and delivered without compromise. Amid the commotion, JD Vance shook his head slowly. His expression was a mix of amusement and disbelief at how swiftly events had taken a dramatic turn. "Is it really that simple?" Vance murmured, his tone laced with irony and satisfaction. His words hung in the air as the crowd absorbed the owner's actions. The owner then turned directly to Vance. "You wanted to keep us in the news, didn't you?" he challenged, his tone blending accusation with approval. The question was aimed squarely at Vance, and the assembled crowd listened intently, awaiting his response. Without a moment's pause, Vance reached up and readjusted his hat, smoothly placing it back on his head. A slow smile spread across his face as he pulled out his phone again and opened the camera app. In one fluid motion, he snapped a selfie capturing the charged atmosphere, the defiant glint in his eyes, the unmistakable hat, and the backdrop of a restaurant in turmoil. The camera flash punctuated the moment, and the image quickly circulated on social media. Within minutes, the selfie went viral. The bold display encapsulated the evening's drama, and comments and shares flooded in, turning the incident into a national talking point. The owner's press statement and Vance's defiant act had transformed a simple dispute into a full-blown media spectacle. The manager, now utterly deposed, could only stand in silence as his actions were scrutinized and condemned by an outraged public. The owner's firm decision had shifted the balance of power, exposing the absurdity of selective rules and their enforcement. The atmosphere in the restaurant remained electric. Patrons exchanged looks, some nodding in approval, others whispering in disbelief. The viral image ensured that the night's events would be remembered for a long time. Every element, the owner's bold statement, the manager's silence, and Vance's defiant selfie, merged into a narrative that demanded attention. In that final moment, the owner's gaze swept over the room. The gravity of the incident was clear to all. The confrontation had escalated beyond a simple policy dispute into a moment of reckoning for the restaurant. With social media amplifying every detail, the future of the establishment was now tied to this one incident. As the last echoes of conversation faded, Vance's smile reappeared. He adjusted his hat once more, his confidence unyielding. "This photo will become the main meme of the week," he declared, sealing the fate of the evening with a touch of defiance. The events of that night had irreversibly changed the restaurant's landscape and left every attendee with a sense of anticipation for what was to come tonight.